My son-in-law looked me dead in the eye at the company gala and told his CEO that I was the building's maintenance man. He didn't know that my name was on the deed to that building, or that I still owned 38% of the company they were both standing in. His face when he found out is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this actually started, which was a Tuesday afternoon in September when my daughter called to tell me her husband had just been promoted to Regional Director of Operations at Kellerman and Associates. I remember I was out on the back porch feeding the birds, same thing I do every afternoon around 3 o'clock, and she was so excited she could barely finish a sentence. Dad, he did it. He actually did it. He actually did it. 6 years, and he finally broke through. I told her I was proud of him. I meant it too at the time. My name is Frank. I'm 64 years old. I live alone in a modest colonial on Birchwood Lane in Asheville, North Carolina. And if you drove past my house, you would think exactly what most people think. Retired school teacher, maybe? Someone who clipped coupons and took the grandkids fishing on weekends. I drive a 2019 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror I keep meaning to get fixed. I wear the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation from October to March. What most people don't know, including my son-in-law for the better part of 6 years, is that I founded Kellerman and Associates in 1987 out of a spare bedroom with a fax machine and a business license that cost me $40 at the county clerk's office. I built it into one of the largest commercial real estate consulting firms in the Southeast. Sold the majority stake in 2019 to a private equity group out of Charlotte, but kept my 38% as a condition of the deal. My name is still on the lease of the Asheville headquarters building because I own that building outright and lease it back to the company at below market rate. A little arrangement I made with myself, you could say. I never told my daughter the full scope of what I had, not because I didn't trust her, but because I'd watched too many families come apart at the seams over inherited expectations. Her mother, Eleanor, God rest her, always said money was the fastest way to turn people into versions of themselves they'd be ashamed of later. I kept my finances quiet, lived modestly on purpose, and figured the time for full disclosure would come when it needed to. I didn't expect that moment to arrive at the Kellerman and Associates annual foundation gala on a Friday night in November. My daughter Lee had been after me for months to come. The firm held it every year at the Kellerman Building downtown, a fundraiser for the Asheville Children's Foundation that Eleanor had helped start back in 2003. I'd attended for years when I was still active in the company, but after the sale, I'd stepped back, kept my involvement quiet. The new leadership knew who I was, of course, but the day-to-day staff, the newer hires, they knew me only as a name in the company history displayed on a plaque in the lobby. Lee wanted me there because it was Marcus's first gala as regional director. She wanted the family present. I understood that. I told her I'd come, but I'd come as myself. No announcement, no special introduction, just Frank from Birchwood Lane, attending a nice event in support of a good cause. What I didn't account for was Marcus. Marcus had been promoted, and a promotion, I've learned, does something to certain men. Not all men, but certain men. It inflates them. It convinces them that what they've achieved is a reflection of what they're inherently worth, which is a dangerous confusion. Marcus was 39 years old, had an MBA from Wake Forest, wore suits that cost more than my monthly electric bill, and had spent the last 6 years barely acknowledging my existence except to accept money from me on 4 separate occasions. Lay's graduate school loans, $22,000. Their wedding, I covered the venue and catering, which came to just under $30,000. The down payment on their house in Kenilworth, $60,000. When Marcus's startup consulting side project collapsed and left them short. And 2 years ago, a quiet transfer of $15,000 when Marcus had a tax situation he described as complicated and needed resolved before the end of the fiscal year. He had thanked me each time, graciously even, the kind of thank you that felt like a door closing. I arrived at the gala at 7:15 in a navy blazer and gray slacks, the nicest thing I owned that still fit properly since Eleanor passed. The event was held in the main atrium of the building, tall windows looking out over the streetlights, round tables with white linens and little votives, a jazz quartet near the bar. About 200 people. I'd been to this room 100 times, knew the echo of my own footsteps in it. Leigh found me near the entrance and hugged me tight. "You came," she said, and the way she said it made me realize she hadn't been entirely sure I would. Of course I came. Marcus was across the room with a group of colleagues, holding a glass of scotch, laughing at something. He was wearing a charcoal suit I didn't recognize. He looked comfortable in a way that sometimes made me uneasy, the comfort of a man who had started to believe his own press. He spotted us and came over, and his greeting to me was exactly what it had been for 6 years. A handshake, firm but quick, and then his attention sliding past me to more important things. "Glad you made it, Frank." Not Dad, Frank. Always Frank. Delivered with the same half-smile that managed to say, "You're welcome here," without saying you belong here. The evening started pleasantly enough. I found a seat at a table near the back, talked to a few people I knew from the early days. A woman named Joyce, who had been my first office manager back in the 90s, now retired herself, caught up with me near the bar, and we spent 20 minutes remembering what the place had looked like before the renovation. The building had been gutted and redesigned in 2015, and I'd overseen every detail of it. The cherry paneling in the conference rooms, the marble in the lobby, the plaque near the elevator that read, "Kellerman and Associates, Est, 1987, founded by Franklin R. Kellerman." I was Franklin R. Kellerman. That detail had apparently never made its way to Marcus, or if it had, he'd stored it somewhere he didn't consider important. Around 8 o'clock, I was near the back hallway where the building's mechanical room was, an area I knew better than anyone. One of the overhead lighting fixtures had been flickering all evening, a minor ballast issue I could identify from 30 feet away. A young events staffer was standing near it looking helpless. I stopped. "It's the ballast," I said. "Check the breaker panel around the corner, second row, third switch. Flip it off and back on." She looked at me like I was either a genius or a lunatic. "How do you know that?" "I've had it fixed 4 times, I said. "Do me a favor and just try it." She disappeared around the corner. 30 seconds later, the light stabilized. I didn't think anything of it. I went back toward the main atrium. What I didn't know was that Marcus had been walking behind me with his direct supervisor, a man named Colin Ashford, who had joined the firm after the private equity acquisition and now served as president of operations. Colin was exactly the kind of man I liked. Precise, fair, had come up from the analyst ranks and earned every title. We'd met twice during the transition period, and I respected him. Marcus had seen me directing the young staffer, and Marcus, being Marcus, felt the need to explain what his father-in-law was doing at a formal corporate event troubleshooting light fixtures. "That's Lee's dad," he told Colin, keeping his voice low but not low enough. "Retired. He's a little out of his element in places like this, but he means well. Nice enough guy. Spent his career in facilities management, I think, maintenance, that kind of thing. We let him come to family stuff." I heard every word. I stood with my back to them, and I felt something move through me that was very cold and very quiet. Not anger exactly, something older than anger. The feeling a man gets when he finally sees a thing clearly that he'd been choosing not to look at directly for years. We let him come. I took a breath. I picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I did not turn around. What Marcus could not have known in that moment was that Colin Ashford turned to look at him with an expression I would have paid money to see, because Colin knew exactly who I was. Colin had shaken my hand at the acquisition closing. Colin had a copy of the original founding documents in his office in a frame because the private equity group had insisted on it as part of the firm's heritage documentation. "I'm sorry," Colin said to Marcus. "What did you say his name was?" "Frank, Lee's dad." "Why?" A pause. "Marcus," Colin said slowly. "That's Franklin Kellerman." I turned around then. I couldn't help it. I wanted to see his face. Marcus had gone the particular color of a man who has just realized he is standing on a trap door. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. "The Franklin Kellerman," Colin continued, and there was no cruelty in his voice, just the steady tone of a man delivering facts. "He founded this firm. That plaque by the elevator with his name on it, that's him. He still owns this building. And unless I'm mistaken," he glanced at me with something that might have been apology, "he still owns 38% of the company, which technically makes him one of our largest individual shareholders." Lee had materialized beside me. I don't know when she'd arrived. She was looking between her husband and me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since she was 9 years old and had accidentally broken her mother's favorite lamp. Marcus's mouth was still open. "Facilities management," I said quietly. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was just tired. "I did do a fair amount of facilities work, Marcus. I made most of the decisions about this building for 15 years, so that part's not entirely wrong." "I didn't," he started. "I know you didn't. I had no idea you were. I know that too." What followed was the most uncomfortable 12 minutes of what had otherwise been a pleasant evening. Colin excused himself with the dignity of a man who understood he'd witnessed something private. The people nearby had heard enough to know something had shifted, but not enough to understand what. Marcus stood very still in the way that men stand when they're trying to decide between doubling down and disappearing. Lee looked at me. Her eyes were wet. "Dad," she said, "how long have you—" "A long time, sweetheart. Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about Eleanor, about what she used to say about money and what it did to people, about the 4 separate times Marcus had accepted my financial help with gracious thank yous that felt like doors closing, about the 6 years of Frank Lee's dad, whose career was probably maintenance, right? I wasn't sure it would change anything, I said honestly. I was hoping it wouldn't need to. Marcus was looking at the floor. When he finally looked up, his face had gone through several things and landed somewhere I hadn't expected. Not defensiveness, not the practiced charm he usually deployed, but something raw and small. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, genuinely ashamed. "I've been an idiot," he said. It wasn't a performance. I've seen his performances. This wasn't one of them. "You've been careless," I said. "That's not the same thing, but it's worth thinking about." Lee had taken his arm, but she wasn't looking at him the way she usually looked at him. She was looking at him the way you look at a person when you're re-examining the whole picture and you're not entirely sure the math works out the same way it did before. I excused myself and walked to the lobby. The plaque was there, where it had always been. Franklin R. Kellerman, founded 1987. Someone had put a small arrangement of white flowers next to it, which happened every year at the gala as a small acknowledgement of the firm's history. Eleanor had suggested it originally, years ago, and whoever planned these events had kept the tradition without knowing where it came from. I stood there for a minute with my hand on the wall beside the plaque, not touching it, just near it, the way you stand near something that belongs to you. Joyce found me there. She'd seen enough of the evening to put together the general shape of what had happened. "How are you doing, Frank?" "I've been better," I said. "I've also been a lot worse." She laughed, and it was the laugh of someone who had known me when I was young and frightened and didn't know if the business was going to survive its 3rd year. "What are you going to do?" I'd been asking myself the same question. The easy answer was nothing. The situation had resolved itself with a completeness that required no further action from me. Marcus knew. Colin knew Marcus knew. Lay was going to spend a significant amount of time thinking about things she probably should have thought about years ago. The natural consequence had arrived exactly as natural consequences do, without drama, without planning, with the terrible quiet efficiency of truth. But there was the other matter. I had, in the weeks before the gala, been in early conversations with my financial advisor about the structure of my estate. Part of those conversations had involved the planned gift, a transfer of assets to Lay that would have included a minority stake in a commercial property in Biltmore Village, worth roughly $900,000 at current valuation. A wedding anniversary gift of sorts for their 10th anniversary coming up in March. I'd been keeping it quiet, letting the paperwork take shape before saying anything. I had not finalized anything. Nothing was signed. I drove home that night and sat in the kitchen with a cup of decaf and Eleanor's photograph on the counter where it always was. I talked to her the way I sometimes did when I needed to think out loud. She would have told me not to punish Lee for Marcus's behavior. She would have been right about that. She was usually right about things that mattered, but she also would have told me that gifts given in hope are different from gifts given in certainty, and that I was under no obligation to give $900,000 to a household where the person I'd be partially giving it to had spent 6 years treating me like a man who fixed light bulbs and accepted charity. The gift was not finalized. I told my advisor to pause the process indefinitely. That was my decision, and I'm comfortable with it. What happened with Marcus and Lee in the weeks that followed is theirs, not mine. I know Lay called me 4 days after the gala, and we talked for 2 hours, which was the longest conversation we'd had in years. She cried. I didn't, though I wanted to. She asked me a lot of questions I answered as honestly as I could. She asked me if I was angry at her. I told her I wasn't angry at anyone. I was just tired of being invisible to people I loved. She didn't have an answer for that. Neither did I, really. But saying it out loud was something. Marcus sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter on paper, which I did not expect from him. It was 3 pages. I read it twice. It didn't change what happened, but it was genuine, and genuine things deserve to be acknowledged. I acknowledged it. I'm not going to tell you we're best friends now. That's not how this works. 6 years of a certain dynamic doesn't reverse in a month because of one uncomfortable evening. But Lee came for Thanksgiving and Marcus came with her, and he helped me fix the fence post in the backyard that had been leaning since August, and neither of us talked about the gala, and I thought that was probably the right way to handle it for now. What I'll tell you is this. I've lived a quiet life on purpose. I drove modest cars and wore flannel shirts and let people draw their own conclusions because I never wanted to be liked for the wrong reasons. Eleanor and I built something from nothing, and the hardest part of building something from nothing is that nobody can see the nothing you started with. They only see where you ended up and assume you were always there. Marcus saw a retired man at a corporate event who knew how to fix a light fixture. He saw someone who needed to be explained and apologized for, someone to be tolerated at family functions. He didn't see the 64-year-old man who had once sat alone in a spare bedroom at 2 in the morning, staring at a fax machine, wondering if he'd made the worst decision of his life or the best one. I think about that young man sometimes, what he would make of all this. I think he'd say, you don't owe anyone a performance of who you are. You just have to be it. The rest takes care of itself. The plaque is still there by the elevator. The flowers get replaced every November at the gala. I wasn't there this year, but Lee told me they looked nice. That was enough. I still think about that moment in the lobby, standing next to the plaque with Eleanor's flower arrangement beside it, trying to figure out what I actually felt. Not triumph. That's the honest answer. I expected to feel something sharp and satisfying, the way you feel when a long argument finally gets resolved. But what I felt was closer to tired. A good tired, maybe. The kind that comes after you've been carrying something a long distance and you finally set it down. Marcus had spent 6 years making quiet assumptions about who I was, and I'd let him, partly out of pride, partly out of Eleanor's old wisdom about money and what it does to people, partly because I genuinely believed that a man's character shows itself without the help of a bank statement. What I didn't fully account for was that some people never look for character at all. Some people look for signals, status, proof. And when they don't find the signals they recognize, they fill in the blank with whatever story is most convenient. He filled it in with maintenance man, with Lee's retired dad who means well, with someone to be explained and apologized for. That's not a moral failing so much as a failure of attention, of genuine curiosity about the person standing in front of you. I've thought about it a lot since November. And I think the most honest thing I can say is this. The way Marcus treated me had almost nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with the habit he'd built of measuring people by the wrong things. When you spend enough years doing that, you stop seeing people clearly. You stop asking questions. You just sort. What I didn't do was correct him. And I've had to sit with that. There's a version of this story where I pull Marcus aside in year 2, show him enough of the picture that he understands who he's dealing with, and we build something more honest from the start. I didn't do that. I kept my cards close because I was testing something, and I told myself it was wisdom when maybe part of it was stubbornness. Eleanor would have called me on that. She had a gift for identifying the moments when I confused dignity with avoidance. What I know is that the people who built something real, who started from nothing and earned their way through years of early mornings and bad quarters and decisions that kept them up at night, those people tend to be the quietest ones in the room. They've already proved what they needed to prove to themselves. They don't need the room to know it. That kind of persistence, the staying power to keep building something for decades without needing constant recognition, that's not something you're born with. You develop it in the hard years, the ones that don't make good stories at galas, and the integrity to treat a janitor and a CEO with the same basic decency. That's a choice you make every single day, not once when someone's watching. Marcus is 39, there's still time. The letter he wrote me was 3 pages, and it was real. And real things are worth something even when they arrive late. I drove home from the gala that night on the same roads I've driven for 30 years, past the same gas station and the same church and the same bend in the highway where Eleanor used to roll down the window no matter how cold it was because she liked the smell of the river. I've got the plaque. I've got the building. I've got a coffee with Lee next Sunday. That's enough to work with.